So this video is going to take you through a step-by-step process of how to build a strong academic paragraph for your personal statement, specifically for those of you who don't have any extracurricular activities or any internships or anything to write about. Follow these steps, you should be fine. So the first step, find something to write about. So this is often the trickiest part for a lot of you, is you don't know where to start. I've made a previous video on this, but this is why I really recommend that you're reading blogs. Books are useful in that you need the development. You need the information in there to build up something that's really competent. But in the beginning, you just need a spark of inspiration, something related to what's happening these days, what's being discussed in the field in which you're interested in, and then you find from there some inspiration. I'm going to focus on economics today, but I'm going to make future videos about other degree subjects because you do not need technical knowledge in order to build up an academic paragraph like this. So here's an example. I'm taking you to the Free Economics blog here. I've chosen a couple of different podcasts, but if you look at the title of these ones, then one of them is talking about growth and whether that is a good objective. Another one is talking about choice and whether there's too much of it. So what you can see from those, and this leads us to, is going to lead us to the second step in a moment, is that some of these terms and some of these concepts should be familiar. So where should this be familiar from? Step number 2 is link this immediately to something you know from A-level. Okay, so let's take this growth one as an example. We know from A-level or GCSE that an objective of the government is to pursue economic growth. At the same time, what we are sacrificing there are going to be, we have macroeconomic objective conflict with any of the others, but in this particular podcast, it was focusing on the payoff or the trade-off between growth and then environmental degradation, right? So clearly this is an issue that's been growing, and this is an issue that a lot of economists and people are studying at this point in time. So immediately you've got a starting point. So you can say from A-level we knew this, but from the evidence and the readings that I'm doing at the moment, there is more to think about. So in this particular podcast, it does mention a very famous author, an economist, Kate Raworth, sorry, I don't know the pronunciation precisely, but she's written a book, Donut Economics. It's a very popular book, very famous book, really interesting book, so highly recommend it. But from there, what you can see is this next model. So from A-level, whilst you might recognize a Kuznets curve, which trades off development and environmental degradation or inequality, Kate, now she's introducing to you a new model, a way of thinking. And so this is now, you're going to try and understand this model a bit more. In order to do so, read the Wikipedia page first, always. It's so useful in getting a brief overview of new terminology, things that you might not have heard of before. So you're beginning to build links now of what you can discuss, how you can build up a convincing paragraph without making it seem as too forced, if you know what I mean. So again, from here, try and take some inspiration from who she's talking about, or who's criticizing her work, who's responding to her work, who she's basing her ideas off of in terms of classical economists. So lots of things to research here. This is all part of your process. Now that we've established what it is we're going to talk about as a general topic, how we know it already, now we're going to see where are we going to go next. So step number 3, link it to what you are trying to learn, trying to understand. So I personally think it's best to link to a concept or an idea that you will learn at university. So just choose one. So where are you going to find those ideas? This is again where the university course pages are going to come in really, really useful. Some universities have more detailed course pages than others, so don't restrict yourself to just the ones that you're trying to get into. You really should be looking at a broad range. So look at the course pages, and on here you're going to see some names. You might see, okay, there's micro here, there's macro here, Bertrand, Corno, Stackelberg. You're going to see these names mentioned. Then see, do these have any links to what you are looking at currently? If you look in enough detail at enough course pages, you are going to find something that fits. It's a bit of legwork, but if you want to make something really, really good, then you've got to do it, right? So the next stage is going to be identify a question. In order for a personal statement is made up of several parts. In order for this particular part to be successful, you need it to be cohesive. In order for that to be the case, you have to begin with a question and have answered it by the end. And that leads us to the 5th stage, which is going to be, what is the conclusion? So we know what we're going to start with, then what's the conclusion? What is the answer to your question? Often you cannot know that until you've fully finished all your research. So maybe you move this stage to the end, but you may come across it sooner and then spend spend the rest of the time, which is more often the case, trying to prove how to get to that conclusion. But either way, you want clearly somewhere on a mind map, question, conclusion. The next stage is going to be, what is the process from question to conclusion? I like to visually map this out. So identify the question and then do a step-by-step. How did you get to the conclusion? Perhaps the first stage was reading an article. The second stage led you to a book. The third stage led you to a YouTube video. From there, you looked up theory in a textbook. From there, you found some maths, and that got you to the conclusion. Either way, document your journey really, really carefully. You need to know and remember exactly what it was at each stage that you came across. Linked to this is the next stage, which is going to be to what is the underlying material or theory that you needed to get to the conclusion. So at every step of your process, let's say you read the article, you need detailed notes. What was the main idea? Who was the theorist? Who disagrees with it? What is the criticism here? Next stage, how has your interest in the subject supported this journey? Now, this is kind of a bit more subtle. It should be really ingrained throughout, but interest in a subject would show that you didn't stop at the first hurdle, you kept looking. So if you have a first stage, I expect there to be a second stage. Maybe that second stage wasn't convincing, so you went to a third stage. Maybe from third stage, you got 2 different opinions, and so you went down 2 routes and you landed on one. This is all how a really strong student would think at university, and it would be fantastic to show that from now. The last stage is going to be, what are the limitations in your current level of understanding? No matter how much research and efforts you put into this, fundamentally there'll be something that you're not understanding because you simply haven't learned it, or you don't know some of the other concepts required for it to make sense. So some understanding or some nod to that you have to do a bit more work would show the tutors, yes, they've put in the work and they've got the curiosity, but they're also ready to learn and they understand they don't know everything. Overconfidence does not work in your favor most of the time, especially if you get asked to explain something and you can't. Those are all the stages. I'm going to just quickly go through the paragraph that I've written. It is for economics, but hopefully you can follow along okay, even without knowing the theory. So the question I came up with, why are there so many types of cereal in stores? Why are they all basically the same? I found this question to be pretty interesting myself. I chose cereal as a random example, but this could apply to jams, this could apply to, I don't know, whatever else, like, you know, soft drinks, anything like that, where you go in and you say, why are there 200 types of this same product? And why are they all basically the same thing? And I think it's a pretty interesting question. The conclusion that I found here, of course, there can be many different answers, solutions to this question, but the one that I've chosen is it can be rational for producers to make their products as similar as possible according to the minimum differentiation principle. So what am I using to explain this? Well, in terms of my process from question to conclusion, I'm going with, I found out this idea of having too much choice. I read some articles about there being too much choice. I read articles about differentiation of product. I came across horizontal and vertical differentiation. From there, this led me to Hotelling's linear city model. From there, I'm thinking about game theory and backwards induction. So that was my process, right? So what was the material that I need to understand here? Well, it's not too much. I've got the linear city model, which is my main thing. So I really need to make sure I understand that in terms of optimizing prices, indifferent consumers. I'm setting it up. What assumptions do we need for this to be true? That was interesting enough. How has my interest in the subject supported this journey? Well, I'm so interested because I've always wondered this question about why do fast food chains locate next to each other, cafes locate next to each other. Hotellings explains this as well. You can have consumers have minimum differentiation along preferences, but also location, which is why Starbucks and Costas and things tend to be right next door to each other. What are the limitations of my understanding? Well, I wish that I would be able to derive mathematically the result of this if we were to use Bertrand competition, which tells us that price will be set equal to marginal cost when firms get to first price set and then quantities follow. This is something that comes up in university, but links very well to the idea that I'm discussing here. And although this might sound too complex for you now, I promise you that if you are following your own process and your own journey, these ideas will naturally come up towards the end of your research. So whatever you find there will sound just as complex to somebody else who hasn't read the same things. So I've also said extension of this is, if there's minimum differentiation of product where you make products as similar as possible, what about maximum differentiation? That would be a really interesting next step to explore, and I could bring in a different theory to explore that, which would make the whole thing very analytical, very critical. Version 1 of my personal statement paragraph, I wrote this probably in about the first version in about 5 to 10 minutes. The second version I spent a bit longer, 10 to 15 minutes. What I'm trying to say is that it shouldn't take you an overwhelming amount of time. The main part is the research. This is just putting it all together, and it really should be as simple as just puzzling the pieces together. So in version 1, I always go simple. I'll just put it up on the screen here, but notice the language I'm using here is obviously the grammar is totally incorrect. I've just got my order right, because that's the most important thing. Have I put it in an order where the tutor can clearly see my journey? I started with A-level economics and my interest. That led me to observing this particular occurrence. This led me to try and find what concept of horizontal and vertical differentiation is. Then I go deeper into the model. Then I link that to university level learning, and I'm finishing off with I'm interested. So the order of events is very important here. Here's my final version, version 2. Again, I'll pop it up on the screen instead of reading it out. But it's not too different. It is still just following the same order. I find economics interesting because of this. In shopping at a grocery store, I noticed this cereal thing. This led me to game theory, hotellings, the result of hotellings, and then linking it to a bit of, in terms of statistics, referring specifically to the Kellogg company. And then I've linked it to saying I watched a microeconomics course on edX. So I didn't, right? But I can still link that in to show evidence of my learning and curiosity. I've then linked that to Bertrand competition theory to show that I have looked at the syllabus of what I'm going to learn. And then I'm just saying at A-level, we only learn the results, because of course we do learn allocative efficiency, price equals marginal cost at A-level, but not why, not how we get there, right? So I think that's an interesting observation. I've then started thinking about maximum differentiation linked to competitive advantage and core competencies, but that's a paragraph for another day. I will leave it there. If you do have a random extracurricular, let's say that you picked up or volunteer in the local parks and pick up litter, this is the perfect way to incorporate it into a paragraph, is have a bit of extracurricular in your academic paragraph. Maybe the other thing we were discussing about growth versus environment, you could say, by volunteering in the local parks to clean up the litter, I was wondering why this was still such a prevalent issue in the developed world, despite there being such a trade-off when it came to growth, when I came across a podcast, So even with minimal extracurricular activities and work, you can still put together a fantastic, convincing personal statement that any tutor would be glad to read, glad to see, and can be original. I hope that was helpful for you all. If you have any questions specific to your subject degree, or if you want to run an idea by me, I am happy to take comments. So please leave a comment if you like.